Hello, Hagen. We are talking to Hagen Henry, who has been chief of the ILO's Cooperatives branch, who has worked on cooperatives and cooperative law and policies for many decades, a cooperator, a German cooperator, who is also an academic in Finland now. We are here at ILO's Cooperatives Unit in Geneva, where we are celebrating our 100th anniversary. So, welcome, Hagen.
Thank you. Well, congratulations, first of all, on your celebration of the 100 years, and I'm very happy to be back in this house to discuss some of the issues
You're
which
always
are
welcome.
at our heart.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's always great to have you here and to learn from you. So, we thought we would ask you a little bit about your engagement with cooperatives, with the ILO, but even before the ILO. How did you get the cooperative bug?
Yeah, how did I get the cooperative bug is actually simple in a way, and very it can be very brief. It was one telephone conversation with a
That's
person.
all it took.
Yeah, well, it's how it started.
Okay.
With a person you know quite well, Professor Mönkner in Germany, who actually in a very short telephone conversation convinced me to move towards cooperative law more specifically. As I explained many times, and that is the experience I share with many of my colleagues and others, during my formal education, I'd never come in contact, not only not in contact with cooperatives, but not even with the word cooperative or the word cooperative law. So there's nothing in the formal education. Also, but I realized it only later, once I'd started to work more systematically on these issues of cooperative development and cooperative law, especially. Then in hindsight, I understood that, during my youth, I had lived in an area which was full of cooperatives in southwest Germany. I mean, everything was cooperative. The bank and the shop and agriculture was there and what have you at that time, and that hasn't really changed. So, and that these are basically also the subjects which we are still dealing with. I think that in our education systems there is nothing. Also, in the respective countries, you come from Turkey, I come from Germany originally. There are cooperatives, and they play an important role in many respects, not only economically but also socially, culturally, and politically sometimes. So there is a very disconnect, a mismatch, and something unexplained. I mean, we have some anecdotal explanations, but not really, not really researched explanation why that changed. And I think the important thing is to emphasize that in the past, so if we go back in history, 40, well, a little bit more than 40 years, 50, 60 years, and more, there was quite a bit in the formal education. If you studied economics, law, other areas, cooperatives were sort of a natural part of your education, and that disappeared probably at the beginning of the 70s, but something to be discussed.
Okay. And then you got involved with the ILO, which, of course, is a United Nations institution involved in the world of work, has also a special relation with the cooperative movement, the cooperative world, from its starting days.
Yeah. Well, I probably told you before, I mean, I came in contact, so to speak, also not directly with the ILO, rather early on in my studies. I studied 1 year here in Geneva. And also I didn't understand a bit, whom I met then. It only became clear later on, a trade unionist from Madagascar, by chance, who prepared himself for the ILC in 1974. And so we discussed labor law issues, of which I had not really, a lot of knowledge at that time, nor have I know now. Sorry, but also I was fascinated by this international organization, which is a bit different from the others. So that was the very first contact, and then many years nothing. And in fact, the first contact then I had was already in preparation, I would say, of the recommendation 193. So the first meetings, not even yet expert meetings, but other preparatory meetings for an expert meeting. That's how I got involved.
And that is the 1990s.
That was the beginning of the 90s, 1993.
Okay. Yes. And that process around the recommendation, that went on for a decade or so.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. I mean, you're right.
You were
I'm not even sure because
that,
when the first preparatory meeting took place there was an expert meeting, I think, in 1993, which I did not participate, but in some other events. So there must have been even before some preparation already, I would imagine. So yes, it took at least 10 years, during which I was not continuously sort of involved, but certainly up to the mid-90s, and then at the end of the 90s again. And in between the mid-90s, so 1995, this expert meeting, and then I'm not sure, 97, 98, something like that, when we really started writing these reports.
What was your role?
My role was to write the policy paper and the law paper. So I did, but nobody liked my policy paper. So I was, out of that, and I continued on the law side. And I actually don't know who then continued on the policy side. Never mind. And what had happened in between and mid-90s roughly and end 90s was that the work in parallel started on the elaboration of the United Nations guidelines on Cultists. And that was very much in the hands of COPAC at the time. So yes, so this, of course, no coincidence, that these things happened. And 1995, of course, the statement of the ICA, so it all fell into the same period. There was something in the air at the international level.
What was it that was happening?
Well, let's not forget, for the 1995, let's say, if we take this as, the first formal instrument, the ICA statement on the cooperative identity, that happened only, 6 years after the
fall of the Berlin
Wall. So that, of course, it was the end of the Cold War. So there was a need even to renew some ideas on cooperatives, to come up with a new statement on the cooperative identity. And I think that played also into the discussion of the ILO, and certainly also of the UN. Now, what was in the air? Probably many things. On the one hand, these kind of not by the authors intended, but this discussion on the end of history, and which, and I insist, that was not the idea of the author himself, but that's how it was portrayed. So there was, on the one hand, a sort of thinking, now we all move in the same direction. But then you had, on the other hand, of course, and the same direction would have meant even more on just having one type of enterprise, the capital-centered one. And then there was this other tendency who thought, well, now it's the time, winds are somehow changing. Let's be present in the discussion and insist that there are other ways of doing, other ways of enterprising. And let's renew this identity of cooperatives and see how that could fit the modern and very much radically changed world at that time. I think that probably grosso modo describes what was happening.
There's, I guess, another turning point around the financial crisis, 2007 and 8, and then this whole enterprise model, the dominant model, and
yes, I say it, and I'm repeating. It sounds, of course, macabre to say that. I think that what was called, or is called, the financial crisis of 2008-9, I think that helped cooperatives, or the idea of cooperatives, enormously. It's very clear. Again, it really sounds macabre, because as if we were happy about the crisis. It's stupid, because it had so many repercussions in the social field, etc. So nobody can be glad about that. But it sort of shook the world a little bit up. The question is, where are we now? Of course, 20 years, not 20, 10 years later. But it certainly did that again. It brought to the table this question: is it really so that we can do with one type of enterprise, or do we need, first of all, a diversity of enterprise types? I mean, that came on the table as a discussion point. And I remember very well, the preparatory. No, there was a meeting at the UN in 2009 on the question of whether we should have an International Year of Cooperatives. And this meeting, and there were several, but this one, the first one, I think, of that at that level, was on the question whether we should have a feasibility and desirability of an International Year of Cooperatives. And one of the discussions was, I mean, are we really only living a financial crisis, or is it, as I said and others, it's more of a mental crisis, the way of thinking which is in a crisis. And if we don't change that, we will probably hope that this crisis will vanish and then do the same old stuff again. And that there is always this risk. And again, the discussion was not to say, well, we should all be cured by cooperatives. No, but diversity of enterprise types.
In fact, it's 2020 now, and we are talking in different realms about alternative economic models, new business models, or stakeholder capitalism, and these are all perhaps part of that same discussion around the diversity of enterprise models. No?
Yes, I think very much so, and I think one of the problems of getting into a new thinking is that we are still thinking in terms of capital versus labor. And I know that this is a delicate theme, and it's nothing sort of against the ILO. You know quite well the esteem I have for this institution. But I think the world, I'm not saying that capital and labor is not important and decisive in many, but I think we are in a different world now, where this antagonism is not let's say, at the center of the changes which take place. So the relative weight of this opposition, which you can then solve the conflict by good labor standards, etc., that is not at the center of the what's happening in the economy and in our societies. And we were talking now about knowledge economy, data, creating out of data wealth, and that is where capital and labor play an important but not the decisive role anymore, and that creates new types of enterprises, or let's say it affects enterprises, to be more careful, including cooperatives. I mean, we talk now about platform cooperatives, for example. Is it a new type? It's a question. Nobody has the answer, certainly not I. Is it a new type of cooperative, or is it a new way of doing my cooperative business? Now, this is where the question now is, and we'll see in the future. So this digitalization, I think, is not just a catchword. There is something, technology is driving now, and I think it's much more on data and how to get access to this.
Still in that platform economy, don't you think the issues around ownership and control of power, of mode of production, the means of production are still central, because
these general issues, I fully agree, they're still with us, but those who have the power or have the control power, they're different entities. Now, I think really that the antagonism was, and in a very positive way, was between labor and capital, and the state somehow trying to sort of organize that. And that, I think the biggest power shift at the moment is from political power to the power to process, to collect, process data, and create new wealth out of these data. And this is what we call big data. It's not the state, it's not society, but the power issue is still there. And that, I mean, you're really, I think it's a very central point you raise. Isn't there a field for cooperatives? Because we talk about the autonomy of cooperatives, but also of the members. If we are not in control of our data, where's our autonomy in this new type of production?
Right.
So that's a huge challenge.
Could play a role for more data ownership of workers, but it could also have implications for data minimalism, protecting consumers, customers, users' rights to their own privacy and data.
I mean, it's simplistic, of course it's much more complex. I'm not, I don't have the answers, but look at our definition of cooperatives. What does it say? The cooperatives should address the needs of the members. And I think one of the needs is to regain control over your data. So that's a central issue should be a central issue of cooperatives. Not the only one, let's not, I'm not saying this is the only, of course, all the others remain important. You still have agriculture. The issue is not there. But the overall development, I think we have to keep it in mind that the needs are still, we still have needs. We still have need to eat and housing and all that. But there are other needs, new needs, and we have to address these. And we meaning possibly through the type of enterprise we're talking about, which are cooperatives.
In this changing world of work, you mentioned technology, of course. There is other key changers, pressures, whether it's climate or demographics as well, that are influencing. Are we, when we are emphasizing data and technology, having a debate that is more centered around the global north, or is it really as pressing an issue for the global south as well, the workers and employers and producers of the global south as well?
Well, I'm not denying that this divide, not at all. Obviously, I mean, you just observe. But for me, it's intellectually, first of all, when you say global, it's global. It means exactly, it englobes us all. And I think that is a dramatic change. It's not that the world all of a sudden has become global. I think it's always been global, only that we now realize it is global and we perceive it as such. And that again, I think, without, I don't want to emphasize or put too much emphasis on technology. It's not that, but of course, technology allows us to perceive the world nowadays as global. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, what it took to make a phone call from here to South Africa.
Right.
Well, sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. Now you do what? You pick up your phone here and you press a button, and at the other. The same if you want to transfer money. We don't realize. I mean, it took weeks to transfer money in the past. Now you do it on your computer instantly almost.
Right.
So many more things are becoming that way. And of course, coming back to the big things, production. If I have the right equipment with me, I can print out the spare parts of my car which breaks down in the desert in Africa.
Right.
If I have the same, the right program, and that's it. So that changes, and that allows us, I think, us really, the great majority of us, to perceive the world as global, which has been predicted by physicians a long time ago, by the way. So, and I think that is also the other issue we're talking about, in this overall aim which we have is to contribute to sustainable development. You cannot think sustainable development otherwise than a global issue.
So you think within all this realm of change, cooperatives are still relevant as an enterprise model, organizational model?
Well, I have to say yes, but I'm convinced also that they have. But the issue, I think, and that is it's an intellectual thing, but also a practical aspect to it. We have to sort of not redefine but redistinguish cooperatives from other types of enterprises. And that has become, I think, it has always been, a problem, because identity is what? I mean, you have your identity because you are different from me, and vice versa. So, I mean, what's different? And that, in real terms, what is really different between a cooperative enterprise and, let's say, a stock company, any other type as well? That has become more complicated to do. Why? Well, because of this issue of sustainable development, where the whole question of corporate social responsibility issue. This is not the case anymore. So all enterprises are becoming very serious now about this.
Social impact.
Social impact, societal
environmental
impact.
impact.
This exactly, from the shareholder
The
to the
triple
stakeholder,
bottom.
triple bottom line. And they're becoming serious also in the sense that now, and I have to talk a little bit about law, these things are becoming legal obligations. So you have to report, for example, about a certain size of your company, you have to report. Now you can say, okay, reporting is one thing. Well, it's more than not doing anything. So there is an obligation to report. And if you are then caught on the marketplace not doing what you report, that could be a problem for you. As an example, it was a normal way, and we have changed. We have moved, I think, radically away from that. So it's much more social responsibility, societal responsibility, and that becoming a legal obligation. And that is something where cooperatives, I think rightly so, we're quite proud of, to say, well, this is basically what we have tried to do, let's say, or done also, at least it's in our principles. But what do you do now, if other types of enterprises also do that? So you have to, and I think that is where now the discussion lies, and I think there is still something, and I'm convinced it is this question of participation, democratic participation, where cooperatives, if they do it seriously, have a, let's say, on this issue, a competitive advantage, because it's an inbuilt structural element, and that is would go a long way in looking after things like social justice, which of course is right at the heart of the ILO. I mean, first sentence of the Constitution is about social justice and peace. So, I mean, a long answer to your question. Are they still? Sure. I think they are. If on the other hand we succeed in sort of redefining, in the sense of showing what is this distinctive, at least one distinctive feature of cooperatives.
You mentioned how stockholder companies are also, even by law, being pressured and obligated to show the implications, social and environmental. But then there's other forms of enterprise, right? I mean, we see hybrids and social enterprises, this larger phenomenon of social and solidarity economy, where co-ops are part of the.
I mean, again, of course we sort of discuss in models. We very much always compare the cooperative to the stock company, and we say, well, the stock company is the traditional. Is it so, or is this just something which is being portrayed as such? And I think the latter is correct. By the way, our colleagues whom you know at Jurixe, they've done a couple of years ago a study on that. The majority of enterprises are not stock companies. Family enterprises, partnerships, cooperatives, all kinds of many kinds. But in the public awareness, it is stock company, because the information you get is on the stock market. It's in all the media. But that is, I don't think it's a correct way of portraying the economy or the world of enterprises. There are other types, and true. And then but again, the issue is not cooperatives. Sometimes, to be provocative, I say I don't care about cooperatives. The issue is about diversity of enterprise types. Diversity, because that makes the strength of. And by the way, referring to the crisis you mentioned, I mean, those countries which had talking only about the financial crisis, which had a diverse world of banks, meaning cooperative banks, commercial banks, public
Credit
banks,
unions.
credit unions, etc. Those were the most resilient. That's shown. So this is not anecdotal. That is shown by. So there is something in this diversity thing, and I think that that's important. But the other, as you rightly say, I mean, we have now also something which is new. I think we are mixing now different types. So social economies. You could either say it's a mix or is it a new? We'll see. We'll see. It's interesting. Plus, also this borderline, which at least in many parts of the world, this part including, we see a very clear distinction between the public and the private sector. And I think we are now also in those countries which are proud to make this distinction. We see blending social cooperatives where public entities, energy, which is a very new type.
Another one.
Communities, municipalities are members of these energy cooperatives. Something never heard of, public entity.
In healthcare, provision, education,
energy, utilities in general. There might be new sectors. This
the
is
elderly care, childcare, which I guess is also part
well,
of.
exactly. It has to do, of course, with the redefinition of what is public and what is private. What is a public service? I mean, when I discuss nowadays with students this issue of public service, I get strange looks. They say to me, "Well, what's a public service? What do you mean?" For us, this was very clear. Or at least we thought it was clear, but it was sort of clear. You know what public obligations are, and what the private sector, and that is mixing now for many reasons. Of course, we don't have.
You mentioned the law and the diversity, countries with a diversity of enterprise model being more resilient in times of crises. What is the role of the law in making the space for that kind of diversity to exist? And connected to that, does the law precede the changes? Is it or playing more catch up to the changes?
If we knew, or if I knew,
if we all knew,
if we knew. I mean, it's just per observation, of course. I never thought that the law is the most important. It's not. It's one ingredient. And you have to think about, what actually is the function of law. What is it? I mean, there are many functions, of course. And maybe sometimes you have to be a bit simplistic. I find it strange that people accept it as a given. You play football by rules. And you listen Monday morning what people are discussing football games, foul, this or that. But foul means what? Because people didn't play by the rules. When it comes to issues like cooperatives or enterprises, then people start thinking, well, is law so important? Well, it is. It defines the rule of the game. The game. And then there are other functions, of course, but that is it. You have to. There are rules which you pre-establish, and you go by that, and then you change if needed. And of course, I mean, when it comes to enterprises, there are a number of information you need as business partner, you need as, let's say, as a member or stockholder, doesn't matter. You need as government to know whether this animal, is what it appears to be, or is registered, is the right type. So, and then of course for policy issues and what have you. Now again, the law by itself doesn't do anything. The law by itself doesn't do anything, but on the other hand, lawless economy is difficult to perceive. Now this is in hindsight. You could say, well, who knows what the future will bring, but development as we understand it over the past 300 to 400 years is very close related to law. There is no.
And
I think there cannot be any
implementation.
Well, it's good that you mention it. I'm very thankful because there are two types of even lawyers. Some would say, well, there is the law and the implementation, as you see it, and then there are others like me who never think this in different categories. So law not implemented is not law. But that is, as we probably all know, I mean, this is where the problems often start because, writing a law on cooperatives if you tell me what you want to have there, give me 4 or 5 hours, and that's it. But the implementation, and the implementation in the most widest sense, I mean, by the government, by the people who should apply it, etc. So that is, of course, and that is why I'm so careful to say if I knew, because it's. But basically, I think it is what we accept on the private level is not very different. Only we go by social norms, of course, in our private life, and as we are not governed by social rules, when we are living in wider communities, then we need another type of rules. But the issue itself to rely on on the rules of a game. Be it a family game or whatever it is, is the same. The idea is exactly the same. You have to know how your partners,
You have
will
written,
probably act. Yes.
Yeah, you have written the main reference on cooperative legislation, the guidelines on cooperative legislation, which is based on ILO recommendation 193 on promotion of cooperatives. Perhaps this will be a basic question, but we get a lot of requests at the ILO around cooperative policies and cooperative strategies. If you could reflect on the difference, how different is a cooperative policy or strategy from a co-op law, co-op legislation? Well,
that again, so one of these questions where I would like to have the answer. By the way, as for law, I mean the relationship between law and policy is different from one place to the other. I mean, in the extremes, we know roughly between specialists, what law is and what not law is, or policy starts. But everything in between, some of the issues we're dealing with in cooperative development, in some countries or in some parts of a country, are seen as a policy issue. Whereas in another country, this is a legal issue, legal rules issue. So that is a very complicated thing. This nexus between law and policy. Now, on the other hand, to be more schematic, so to speak, to talk on a model, I think any policy should be based on law. Not meaning that the law is forever, of course, but the law should remain unchanged until such time that there is a political discussion and a political move to change the law according to rules which were pre-established. But otherwise, they are distinct, but on the other hand, very closely linked. So policies should be based on law. The other issue that's more of a technical issue, of course, quite well that some laws, when you read them, they sound, to me at least, like a policy document. Long explanations, but that again, there are different conceptions of what a law is, so we have to deal with that. So asking, what they're both needed, and of course, I would say in the issue, or on the issue which you mentioned before, the implementation of the law, there is a lot of room for policy issues, of course, because the law, however it is written, most of the laws, I would say, I mean, very few exceptions, they leave enough room, well, I would say luckily, but then also, it has a negative side, but luckily, I would say, to give exactly enough space for the implementation, and that is on the policy side, to give it a direction, the government or whoever the actor is wants it to give. If it were very rigid, let's imagine, then there would be no leeway for the politicians in the very positive sense, for the administration, let's say, which would be a disservice to the.
It's not even a singular, right? In many countries of the world, there's not one cooperative law. We are talking about multiple cooperative laws according to the different sectors, from finance to housing to agriculture, and in some cases they are not in harmony with each other.
Yes, another headache. Yes, another headache.
And this is an ongoing issue.
Yeah, it's an ongoing issue. again, because people sometimes ask, what is the better way of doing? From observing or from what you find on the ground, there is no clear answer, because we have countries which have a multitude of laws, Japan, France, Greece, the case we discussed, and you cannot say that per se would make it sort of weaker system than a country like, say, Switzerland or Germany, which have just one law. So, and then also by tradition, because some countries do it more, sector specific or what have you. So there are many aspects to that, but we can only, so again, generally speaking, first of all, the tendency is very clear nowadays, that we go towards one law for all sectors, which is in compliance with the ILO recommendation, I would say, because it is covers in all sectors. I don't know, two or one, one or two. And but then, there is another aspect to it. Where most of the harmonization comes from now is from the regional and international level. We have an increasing number of regional laws, even uniform laws. Now imagine, you have in OHADA, but you have also East African, if you take that continent, East African community, we have 2 uniform laws now. One is in force, the other one not yet.
Not yet.
But that means that one day, so you would have, 16, 17 states, plus I think 6, that makes half of Africa, half of the African states, will be governed by one, not only the same or 2 laws, but for all sectors. So whether they had several sectoral laws or not, some exceptions, technical, let's not go into the details, but that means, from the top, so to speak, this issue is solved for them, from a legal point of view, at least now. For the implementation, we'll have to see how that works. And you have other examples. We have the Mercosur and the Ley Marco, which is not a law per se, but so the EU as well. Also, it it's a slightly, but still so I think the harmonization move is coming probably much more from that side, which might, I think, be an argument for those countries which do have still a multitude of laws for whatever good reasons, might make them rethink. Should they wait until they get sort of a harmonized law from the top, or do it themselves? But I'm myself, this is no secret, I'm very much in favor of having one, for many reasons, one law for all types of all sectors. Yes.
To complicate matters further, there is now a growing, of course, demand around social and solidarity economy policies and strategies and around the world. And what is the relationship of these policies and strategies and laws with cooperative law?
Well, I think this is probably now. Sorry, it's probably very legalistic jargon. I think lawyers have a very particular way of looking at the world, and I use this comparison sometimes. I say, well, we see the world populated by 2 types of persons. One type is you and me, natural persons, physical persons, and then legal. That's outside of that. There's no world for us. Right. You're either a physical person, you and me, or you're a legal entity. The rest we don't, basically. I'm exaggerating, but I think for starting the mindset we have, and that is something which is universal all over the world. It's nothing European. That's everywhere. That's how we see this question. And now that is why also me, when I hear these kind of questions, or the first reaction is: are we talking about a type of enterprise, or are we talking more of the policy, to promotional policy for the social economy? And that would then be probably, certain actors would be eligible to go for this promotion. So that, I think, is one of the main things to be looked at. What are we talking about? Is it
whether
sort
it's
of
promotion
a promotion
or regulation of an enterprise?
Exactly,
or legal
and
entity?
it nicely relates back to your question of policy, and you can, because you have a law, but which actually is it's a form given to a policy. So a promotional policy for the economy, which has the coat of a law. Spain, for example.
Right.
Spain. It's a promotional instrument, basically. They say if you as a cooperative or as an associate, but even another type of enterprise, you fulfill a certain number of criteria, you will be promoted as social enterprise, in taxation and what have you.
Procurement,
but that is for us lawyers. This is more of a it's a formal. Yeah, it appears in the form of a law, but basically it's a policy thing. And we are really only interested as soon as somebody comes and says, okay, now I think we need a new type of enterprise. It could be because of the mix you mentioned before, these in the education, more energy, mixing public and private, that could, of course, lead to the need for a new type of enterprise. But so far, that has not been shown. That there have been many attempts already, but the result has always been of these discussions to say, no, what you want to do, you can do it by choosing a cooperative, an association, and what have you. The whole list of existing. So, but that, you're right. I mean, this makes it more complex. And another aspect to what I said, I mean, the distinction of cooperatives from other types of enterprises has become more complicated. It's not only, in relation to, let's say, the capital-based, but also in relation to which, by the way, the guidelines sort of touched upon, but I'm not saying really going into, but that could be one of the reasons to go further. I think since 2012, a lot of things have happened in the social economy. The discussion has gone on. And
do we need specific guidelines on social and solidarity economy legislation? Are we there yet?
Yeah, you're careful not to tell me what kind of legislation you want. Is it more this promotional type, or is it more really suggesting to create a type of enterprise called whatever the name that would be given? Let's say social enterprise. Doesn't matter. And I'm not excluding anything. I'm just, what we do, lawyers, I mean, we sort of what I call the economy of legislation. You don't create something new. You don't elaborate a new law unless there is really a need to do so. Now, if there is a need, because you say, well, I'm looking at the cooperative, I'm looking at the partnerships, I'm looking at and this and that, and none of them really does or has the sort of ingredients, the elements which I think are needed to make it a social enterprise. Well, then you have a case for going for that. But, well, I probably shouldn't go further because it's not really my field. I'm just observing, but it's necessary, of course, when you work on cooperative law to keep an eye on that, so to speak, because you have to distinguish your cooperative. And maybe the time is right, but I haven't seen a convincing.
Okay.
I haven't. I insist.
Okay.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist. So.
Thank you for that. I want to come back to the ILO, and it's had a cooperative unit and the engagement with the cooperative movement for the past 100 years. And how do you see the role of the ILO with respect to the cooperative movement and the work on cooperatives?
I would, if you allow me, I would. Also, you didn't mention the ICA, but I would like to put them in the same.
Movement, I mean, I guess.
Yeah. No. It's just to say, I think both institutions have, well, obviously they have a long history. ILO 100 years now, and the ICA even longer. 125. So certainly a reason to celebrate. But then I think what both of them haven't done enough yet is to really use their potential. Either, like the ICA potential in terms of, how many people are members of cooperatives, however exact that figure is, it doesn't matter whether it's 1 billion or is it 1.1 or is it 900 million. It doesn't matter. It's a huge amount of people who somehow, at least partly, improve their living conditions through being a member of a cooperative, in a cooperative. So that, I think, that's a huge potential. And the ILO equally, I think, should look again at this the world of cooperatives, which is not captured in the structure of the ILO itself, to see, how it could engage more in this type of the development of this type of enterprise, because the need is clearly there. I mean, it shows in times of crisis, but that doesn't mean that in times where there's no crisis it were not relevant. This mistake, of course, we don't fall into that trap. Some do. It's always been relevant over the many decades now, 150, 170 years. But I think individually both could use, and it's not a negative critique. Don't get me wrong. It's not that. I think they haven't really used the full potential individually nor together. And again, not to be in the political sense say, well, we improve the world or whatever. What you also in our circles sometimes hear, this is the enterprise type of the future. I'm not at all for this.
You think cooperatives have a role to play in advancing decent work?
Yes.
So?
Well, for lawyers, always we ask about the definition. What is decent work? If it is, and I know you're not defining it in a narrow sense of employment, it's work. Yes, I mean what is changing really, and I'm not, again, it's not my field. I should not even talk about it, But obviously the world of work is changing. We're moving into non-employment work, as it's becoming much more relevant. And I'd sometimes just say, well, probably the essential issue for people, you and me, it's about income and livelihood and living conditions. So much wider notion in a way than just work, which is already a wider notion than employment, obviously. So what's really new? And you know better than I what is new. People work differently nowadays. Look, I don't know whether you are affected, but I'm certainly already affected. I used to go every morning to my workplace, which I don't do anymore. I do most of my work on the screen. So who cares from where I'm doing it? So these are the things which are changing. And then don't forget, of course, if we see the whole issue of living conditions, social, the wider issue of labor standards, and that relates back to what we discussed before. The labor standards, social protection, the wider notion of good living and working conditions was what? It was between the state and the two labor market partners, wasn't it? Now, are they still, and I'm not saying willing, it's not about political, are they still capable of providing the same amount of social protection as they, in the wider sense, as they were in the past? And I think the answer is very clearly no. So we have to look at other ways of providing for this kind of protection, protecting the working population, and why not look at cooperatives? Again, not as the only one. So I know it's not a very straightforward answer to your question, but for the overall question of whether cooperatives are still relevant, I think they are.
I'll go back to a segment of our conversation where you emphasize the important rising role of technology, the fourth industrial revolution. How well prepared is the cooperative world to this changing world of technology? Are they keeping up? Are they responding or coming up with innovative strategies in engaging?
Well, that again, should I speak now?
Mhm.
No, as you know, of course, I mean, the world of Cultists is very, very diverse. Very diverse. I mean, we are talking about Cultists, a little, and it's not, devaluating, it's not at all, about a small consumer shop, about, up to high-tech Cultists, really high-tech, high-end. So, and everything in between. Now, whether they are as such prepared, I don't know. I mean, some of the Cultists are certainly very well prepared because they are at the high end already. Now, as a movement, if we look at the ICA, I think, and we talked about the preparations of the Congress this year, and I think this is will be part of it. Where do we stand in all those big, which you all mentioned? I mean, it's the technology thing, the platform, digitalization, etc. Where are we to stay in this move? Because what we didn't discuss, I mean, when we talked about what changed in the mid '90s, what was in the air last year, I think what we should have probably discussed, I mean, one of the, I think, key issues, what was in the air and what then also became part of the ICA statement as it became then part of the ILO recommendation 193, was that for the first time in the definition you find the word enterprise, which does many things, but amongst which that as enterprise you're part of the world of enterprise, and you have to be competitive. Now, however you define now, this is another discussion, is it only on the financial side? Are there other criteria for competitive? That's all open, I think, and that is something we should insist on, that it's nothing predefined. But the fact is, if you can't survive what we call the market, and again, that needs to be defined, but it's a real thing. You have to, every day as a cooperative, you also have to survive as an enterprise. And that has I mean, from the conceptual point of view, that made a huge change, which is still not in all of our heads, because people still come and say, well, the cooperative is more of a social issue. We help each other. Well, that's all very fine, but you have to do it through an enterprise, and that enterprise lives under the same conditions as all enterprises. That's the big challenge.
Any final words, advice for your
No, I'm
colleagues working on these issues at ILO or beyond, the next generation?
I wish you luck. That's and success. That's all. No advice. Keep on going. Keep on going. There are ups and downs. Obviously, this is very general, ridiculous. Of course, there are ups and downs always, but I think it's particularly true for the cooperative branch. It will not in the foreseeable future, I think, come to the glamour it enjoyed. I mentioned to you when I got to know the branch beginning of the 90s. I mean, this was I think it was almost one floor.
Age, yeah.
Almost one floor in this building. 16 full staffs, 4 secretaries, library, what have you. I don't think this will come back for many reasons. Political, that's one thing, but also I think because of this discussion, or the elements of our discussion which you especially mentioned, that we are probably, the enterprise, the conception of enterprise, I think is changing radically. And maybe those distinctions, although I'm still, as a lawyer, of course, looking for these distinctions, that's my job, these distinctions, including for the ILO, might not be that important anymore. Very carefully said, so no, keep on going. There is an issue, I think, where you have a huge advantage over other types of enterprises in the social economy, social solidarity economy. You have a long experience. It's not only the 100 years, it's 150, 60, 70 years of experience with through cooperatives, however you formulate that. and that is something which is we're talking about an economic organization, be it called enterprise or not, be it an enterprise or not, where tradition and what you build up through experience and you give it to the next generation is enormously important. And I think that is something where the Cultists have a huge advantage over other types of similar enterprise types. So no advice. Wishing you well, you and your colleagues, and thank you for your interest.
For another 100 years.
Yes, yes, of course.
You.
Yes.
Thank you, Hagen Henry,
Welcome.
for your time
Most welcome.
sharing your thoughts with us.
Most welcome.